welcome to On the Media's very first live stream ever.
Good afternoon, I'm Joe Baker, a member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians.
Good evening, and welcome to the Green Space, New York Public Radio's ground floor performance venue. I'm John Schaefer. It's been over a year since I've been in this building, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening and to welcome the composer and musician Meshell Ndegeocello and the poet and spoken word artist Carl Hancock Rux, both of whom will be giving us a new version of Carl's piece called The Baptism, a work that was commissioned by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Now, before we see this performance, recorded just a little while ago here in the Green Space, I just want to make clear that there are a couple of iterations of this piece. Originally, the work had a score by Brian Eno and visuals by Carrie Mae Weems, which we will continue to see in the background of this performance, but with the new music, the new musical score, by Meshell Ndegeocello and with Christopher Bruce playing the guitar. And you'll see and hear the two of them performing this new version of The Baptism, which is subtitled Rhetoric. We'll have a chance to speak with the principals about the making of this piece after we get a chance to hear it. But now, from the Green Space, here is Carl Hancock Rux with The Baptism and music by Meshell Ndegeocello.
The farmer knows death is another stage of life. Nothing really dies. We transition, like japonica, like quince. The bush blossoms in spring, but some winters buds early with a cold frost. New buds of japonica manifest another generation of flowers. There is a great parable where one asks the japonica flowers, "Are you the same flowers that died in the frost? Or are you different flowers?" And the flowers reply, "We are not different. We are not the same. When conditions are sufficient, we manifest. And when conditions are not, we go into hiding." It is as simple and it is as complicated as that. When conditions are sufficient, things manifest. When conditions are no longer sufficient, things withdraw. They wait until the moment is right to manifest again. We do not die. We are always becoming. We become air and molecules. As soon as blood circulation and respiration stops, excess carbon dioxide causes an acidic environment, causing membranes and cells to rupture. The membranes release enzymes that begin to nourish themselves on nutrient-rich cells. And these nourished enzymes become many gases of sulfur-containing compounds, and bacteria return to the earth. The microorganisms and bacteria produce an olfactory of sense as organ, muscle, skin liquefied. Protest. When all the body's soft tissue decomposes, we become byproducts of our earlier form. We are never born. We never die. We transition. The day of nourishing is here. The lifeblood of transition. One city to the next, story upon story, house upon house, our wanting always cleaning the air, nourishing the soil of insistence. Every being is a building with music, grace upon grace, upon grace. And now, both hands baptized in blood. The sharecropper's son, the boy from Boonville. The first shall go, the last shall come. Age comes, the body withers. Truth comes as itself, a dissembling of things, an entity of narrow precincts. Truth opens among ventured things, of blood and perfect light, excluding loneliness, finding company. Tenant farmers know about hands and soil, and water on earth, know the lifespan of tobacco crops, and what ice herds hanging over an attic window means to the sky, and all its balconies, vis-a-vis a higher place, a terrace, another room above a room, taking form, catching hold of the torch glow. I am not me. I am watching me, realized as two tall shadows sinking into the hardened earth. Not even the slightest trace of blue dust will tell of the descent of man. Our hours pass into the dim light of half-eaten moons, so long a journey, yet brief. After due time, we return again, if we nurture that which we have planted with great concentration as a witness opposing autumn. Farmers know the moisture of a nightcoat, quilted wet against translucent soil, the constant swelling of hands and feet, followed by complete consciousness. Plant planters, plant. Build builders, build. Take a knee and baptize, imploring succor from the breast of God for a voice, a tongue, a means of articulation. This soil, this civility, this right of man must be guarded until we die and are birthed again. This proclamation belongs to our walking and our wondering. Walk, walker, walk. Sing, singers, sing. Even when the roads are bad and the bridges blocked and the city's gates locked against us, be quick with your questions and slow with your answers as you approach the tilling of this field. You are its caretaker, inheriting an old Masonic hymn of migrants who compel thoughts and fear not jail, nor noose, nor knife. We are not alone in this music. It is an andantito, sung with 4 wind instruments of blues. It is a flute, an oboe, a horn, a bassoon, all manner of stringed instruments coming from within our throats, and the sound we produce. Cavatina for the mother of the dead, lost to a mirror, cloaked in darkness and impenetrable misery. This is the nature of baptism, a thank you of water in company with the web of reason, entangled to it. Nothing can be wasted. Artistic, cultural, and personal relationships to urbanity and regenerative architecture fosters intellectual, human, and financial capital in restoring and replenishing resources of a historical past, a sustainable present, and a wellspring of future opportunities. Think of these two men as one building. No building is wasted. Regenerative design thinks ahead, where architects must design the future, reverse the damage, and create a net positive impact on the environment at the macro scale of sight. Let the storm water run off the roof of your house and make your house stand beneath this ceiling of our responsibility, a place for permanent dreamers, a crop field for tenant farmers, tenants of their own land and winds. Remember them well. They are over and over and never die. Almost clear now. Storm resolving its fury. Sheer stocking of light coming over, coming through the floodgates. Two strokes of copper arching over dayspring. Almost clear now. Clouds braiding over the moss basin, shaking the valley, glistening its illusions, everything washed clean, soon even the soot-stained air. Keep on, keep on, keep on, keep on.
The Baptism, performed live here in the Green Space earlier today by my guests Carl Hancock Rux and Meshell Ndegeocello with Christopher Bruce on guitar. It is a three-part work dedicated to John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and featuring visual imagery from Carrie Mae Weems. And it's a real pleasure to welcome both Meshell Ndegeocello and Carl Hancock Rux back to New York Public Radio and this actual real life event in the Green Space. To both of you, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
Carl, this piece, The Baptism, it's a work now that has several versions to it. The original version has a very long subtitle, This version is subtitled Rhetoric. Why?
Because the language is the same as the first version, so it's rhetorical. It's like repeating what I already said, and I'm saying it again, except that the music is new.
Totally different.
Yeah, totally different. Exactly.
So what was it that the piece was commissioned by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts? What was your brief? What was the idea behind it?
It was a very brief conversation. Speaking of briefs, yeah, they literally said, "Would you?" Lincoln Center called me and asked me would I write a tribute to John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, and I said I would love to. And then I guess I had this thought because I was wondering how. I can hand you a poem, or I can hand you an essay, or I can hand you some, but what are you going to do with it? I couldn't fathom it because of the times that we're living in. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not that people aren't reading things, but just, I wanted it to be more visceral than, and this is no disrespect to publishing, of course, because I do publish, but I wanted it to be something else. And so I called them back and I said, I would love to do this. Is it okay if I invite Carrie Mae Weems to film it? Well, first I said, actually, would you mind if I filmed it? And he said yes. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to call Carrie. And they were like, oh my God, yes. And so that was great. And then we just went down to this theater that I'm co-artistic director of, and filmed it. And she filmed several versions of it, which was amazing. And then it became this poem film. It's its own thing, right?
That original version is Baptism of the Sharecropper's Son and the Boy from Boonville.
Right.
That sounds very specific.
Well, it is because John Lewis was a sharecropper's son, and C.T. Vivian was from Boonville, and it was when I was writing the poem, or even before I was writing it, I was reading a lot about C.T. Vivian. I knew a lot about John Lewis, but I wanted to read much more about C.T. Vivian, and it was also a very fascinating story. I mean, the way his mother, got him out of. I think she got him out of, was it Chicago, or she got him out of wherever they were living, and they were part of the Great Migration, of course, right, moving north. And that because it was her way of trying to ensure his survival, in the world. And she was a single mother, at that time, and it's stunning to me to think of who he became, what he became, the civil rights movement, because of course all of this is happening when his mother is sort of, moving him north. There is no civil rights movement. I mean, it predates it by 50 years or so.
Yeah.
And he winds up going back to the South to be an activist, and it's incredible.
It's a pretty amazing life story, and the idea that we shared a time in history with people who were part of the Great Migration, which was the direct result of the Great Flood of 1927, which had a profound, lingering impact on almost every facet of American society, our culture, our politics. That was the moment when Black Americans, who had up to then mostly been Republican, turned their back on a government that seemed to have turned its back on them and, moved to the Democratic Party. Of course, John Lewis, famously long-serving Democratic congressman. So just the idea that he didn't know history, he lived it, he embodied it, and he was with us until very recently. That's a really kind of power. I mean, I find that a really powerful thing.
Absolutely. And let me just say that what is also powerful to me is that the Great Migration as African American people know it, is not necessarily because of the Great Flood. You know, there were people were afraid of lynchings. You know, people were literally afraid of losing their lives, right? There was no chance that you had for any kind of economic success or political success in the South. You didn't even know if you would survive the day, right? And so lynching was there was a huge anti-lynching movement, you know, that we can speak about, not speak about, whatever, that started in the early 20th century and that was going on. So that whole Reconstruction period, a lot of Black people were literally deciding that they needed to get out of this impoverished state of being and this physical threat to their lives and the lives of their children. So it was huge.
I want to bring Meshell into the conversation as well, and also those of you watching, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook and have a question for Carl Hancock Rux or Meshell Ndegeocello, we'll try and get to those during the course of the conversation. So the original version of the baptism had music by Brian Eno, kind of an A-list name. And yet there was something that, you know, tell us how you and Meshell came to do this version of the piece.
Well, Carrie, she was only supposed to film one version of the poem, but that's not Carrie. I mean, Carrie is a consummate artist, and I think she filmed probably about 3 or 4 versions of it. So we did the original version, and that was with Brian Eno's music. Well, later it became Brian Eno's music. And then while we were there, she wanted me to, we went into another room of the theater, and she put her art behind me and a table in front of me and said, let's do it this way. You know, and then she was like, and let's do it that way. And let's, you know, she kept, you know, she's a visual artist. And so she kept thinking about different ways. So I probably read that poem about 40 times that day. It was filmed literally about 40 times because that's what Carrie does. And so when we decided that we really loved this other version of me sitting at the table with Carrie's art behind me, that's when I also then asked Meshell, would she compose the music to that, so that it wouldn't be so that we wouldn't try to make it as if it was exactly the same thing as it was before, because it wasn't. You know, even though the words were the same, but it was, you know, but it was in a different place and it was a different moment, and therefore I felt like it needed a different kind of musical voice or composer's voice.
And Meshell, you have done so many different types of music, both your own and, you know, recent albums of wonderful covers of other people's music. How was it walking into this, where you had a ready-made kind of multidisciplinary art piece that was kind of presented to you and, all right, go score this?
Well, as my career has shifted, I score for TV and film, and that's how I approached it. I just wanted to enhance his words and aid the visuals. So that was my mindset going into it. I enjoy work like that. It's clarity instead of being on your own emotional tangents, you know.
Also, if you're supporting the words, you don't want to overwhelm the words. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain kind of spare texture, a simplicity of melody, repetition's important, right?
Yes, definitely. For me, that's what I felt. I mean, the migration of the birds and also how he's distilling it and its juxtaposition to flowers and life. I remember when I first started working on it, I have trouble sleeping, so I listened to Alan Watts in my head talk. But once I started working on this, I really found that it was so soothing in both its tone, the tone of his voice, and also the imagery he was creating. So I just tried to hone into that and bring that to a sonic place. It may be seen as simple, but I want it to be enchanting.
Yeah.
You know.
How long have the two of you known each other?
Oh wow.
Well, wow, I don't know. I've been a fan forever, and then a friend. I have no idea. Maybe Toshi Regan,
yeah.
probably. I think we probably met through Toshi Regan. And I wanted to say that it's interesting that you say that Meshell, about and that what you've just said too about your relationship to words and music, because that is why I asked you. Because I have so much respect for what you've done over the years. And I think maybe 2 summers ago, I think I told you that story.
What?
I told you that. You remember? I said I was walking. I haven't done this in years. I was headphones on, walking probably from like 42nd Street all the way down to the Village. Like down on West
that's
Street,
a
right?
good walk, yeah.
Right. If I haven't done that like forever, and I was listening to and all I was listening to was you. I was just listening to just all these albums, and the tonalities, and the intricacies of how you composed and or played and or sung to your own music. It was just breathtaking.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And so I knew that obviously this would be a no-brainer for you. In fact, I didn't even think that I wasn't even sure whether or not it was up to your standards, but I absolutely, but I absolutely.
No, plus I just owed you a solid. He did a favor
know
for
me
me.
anything.
So when he asked me, I had to say yes, and I'm glad I did.
Right. But also, the other thing about knowing each other is that, remember, I always make the joke that I knew you before I knew you because of Beverly, who used to babysit your son.
Yes.
And sometimes she would babysit him at my house.
Yeah,
And so
Beverly Jenkins. Yes.
her son used to be babysat at my house, so it was a whole thing. So there's a whole story that goes
Yes.
there.
Nobody really cares when I first heard you, Carl, but I'm gonna tell the story, not much of a story anyway, simply because it does seem to be germane to this piece in particular. After 9/11, you performed your Lamentations on stage at BAM, and I was a wreck. Our studios then were literally 2 blocks from Ground Zero, and I'd been there that morning. And I found something so, and I hate to use this word, healing about that piece on that night, in that space. And like baptism, there's religious imagery at play in the title. And this piece seems to be cut from the same cloth in terms of themes of healing, of acceptance, of being able to move beyond death, tragedy.
Always. And I wasn't sure. You said on the stage at BAM. Do you mean the play performance that I did, or a song that I did?
It was you reading.
Okay.
It was the first time you walked out on stage, you opened your mouth, and I, the guy who uses his voice as his profession, felt instantly like, oh my God, this guy has like pipes to kill for.
On that day, and excuse me, audience, for having this voice right now, because for whatever reason, it's kind of hoarse. But there's always a spiritual. I think I do look for the spiritual tonality of the moment that we are in, whatever that moment is. And I'm unable to write, create, think in any other way. Even in creating Lamentations, when I recorded it as a song for my Apothecary album, I went down to the Buddhist monks were protesting, remember, at the site of 9/11.
Yep.
And I had my handheld recorder, and I was recording them. So actually, that's how it sort of opens with these Buddhist monks chanting or whatever, and then we kind of mix it into the music or whatever. So it's we have to. When I say we, I just mean humanity. I feel like the only way that we are able to even get through day to day is to literally tap into something that is intangible and that lifts us up and helps us believe that we'll get to another moment. So, yeah.
And so, in the wake of, the wrestling with inequity and inequality, with systemic racism, what you've come up with is not screed, it's not angry, any more than Lamentations was, rending of garments and beating of drums. It was...
You know what, I always say that I took the greatest notes from my adoptive parents. My adoptive father was born in 1915, and his wife was born in 1923 in Harlem. And they were huge jazz fans. And they would play every Saturday night. They would open up their little bar in their apartment and play all this music that I had no relationship to. I didn't understand. I mean, the instrumental stuff, the vocals. I didn't get it. I mean, these people are generations older than me, and the conversations that they would have with each other, it was almost like musicologists kind of arguing with each other about things. But also, sometimes they would call me into the room. My father would be like, like, do you hear that? Do you hear what Train is doing? Do you hear that? Do you hear how he bent that note? Or do you hear, what does that mean to you? And I'm like, I don't know. What is bending a note? Or she would say, like, did you hear like what Billy did, or what Betty Carter did, or whoever? There was, and every Saturday it was this jazz lesson. It was this lesson that was even greater than just hearing those albums, but I think that they were giving me their lives. He'd fought in World War II and had come back, as an African-American man and in America, and, struggled. They existed in this country. And I think it's the music that actually got them through, all of those decades. And to the day that they died, those albums were, those 78s and 33s, handled very carefully, in my home. Vinyl was a big deal. And I was never allowed even to go near the needle so that I wouldn't, destroy, that I wouldn't mess it up. Because that was the soundtrack of their lives and their history. And they needed to give to me. And that's what I inherited. So, yeah, I don't think that I inherited. Well, I did not inherit from them. I did not inherit anger, and I'm not saying that they weren't, but that wasn't the thesis. The thesis of listening to the music was actually about survival, and about existence, and about understanding something else other than what we are taught in school, and how we come to know ourselves and who we come to be.
Meshell, how much of that did you get from, you're writing, you're listening to the baptism, and how much of that ends up in your contribution, in your score to the piece?
Yeah, it's, my own personal connection to it is also, yeah, anger is not my thesis, because I come from a lot of anger, and I think somehow it filters itself through me in a totally different way, and so I just try to have that energy that's very centered in the source, and not to be arrogant enough to think that it's anything I'm generating. I just try to serve the piece and the spirit of the piece, the emotionality of the piece, and Carl's word imagery. It's just so beautiful, especially about the seed, and just the way he talks about, I think of death as an adventure. The way that Carl presents the adventure that we're all in is just so beautiful, and I just hope I somehow mirrored that sonically for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, anger is not the thesis. I tried that for many years. It just doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It's a poem that has a three-part form to it, and so how does that reflect the musical form? I mean, were you able to? There's an expression in silent film accompaniment where it's called Mickey Mousing. So, there's the whole part of the poem where Carl is talking about musical forms and musical instruments. And if you were Mickey Mousing, your music would have turned into a cavatina at one point, and you would have scored a bassoon in there or whatever. You chose not to do that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been lucky. My first, scoring gig was with Ava DuVernay for Queen Sugar, and it's definitely taught me not to Mickey Mouse, and also to, like I said, honor the scoring position, which is I'm just there. I don't want you to really hear me, but I just want to be able to, through your sonic apparatus, aid you in this memory transfer, or astral travel through the words. So I come from the African diaspora, so the repetition for me is to just enchant you, and so you can take in his words. And I think the thing that Chris and I do mostly, or the most important aspect of the piece in conjunction, is the space. We're just trying to create a space for the words to exist in, I hope I don't sound like a jerk. But
No. Enchantment is a really interesting word, and very close to another word, entrainment, which is, what it's a term from neurology, but traditional musicians have cottoned on to this thousands of years ago, that repetition works on the brain and changes the brain and changes the state of mind and state of consciousness of the people who are listening to it. It's a very powerful tool for both forms, for music and poetry.
And even beyond music and poetry, I think that it's a very powerful tool for life and for humanity. That there's repetition in all of our experiences of death, in a way. I mean, we've experienced. I don't know anybody who has not experienced someone dying, even if it's a grandmother or great grandmother. But also writing this poem about these men during this time of pandemic and isolation was interesting, because nothing about it felt completely unfamiliar to me, And I know that may sound weird, but I wasn't. There wasn't a moment that I was an alarmist. That I became an alarmist about COVID-19, and this is with all due respect to all the many people who've lost people, to this terrible, heinous pandemic. But I felt like this notionality, or this sense of danger was already in my DNA, and had been repeated over and over and over again, and was in my father's DNA. Adoptive father, adoptive mother, biological father, whoever he is, biological mother, on and on. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, early in the poem, the image of the flower, are you the same flower as that, that died last winter, or, the whole circular repeating of life.
I mean, it wasn't just the pandemic that we were experiencing when I was commissioned to write the piece, but we were also dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so you had, scores and scores and scores and scores and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people either passing by my house, or I found myself either leaving my house and joining them, to protest. And, you begin to wonder, it's that, what's that old Negro song, how long? Like, like, you know what I mean? Like, how long? Like, what, we from the beginning of the century, there was an anti-lynching movement. We moved toward a civil rights movement in which so many people were assassinated. One of my favorite interviews with James Baldwin, when someone asked him, why aren't you writing? Because you're really supposed to be a writer, but right now you seem to be more of an activist or a speaker. And he said, because they're killing all of my friends, Malcolm, Medgar, Martin. So to have gone through that heinous period, and to think that humanity hadn't learned, or that we haven't learned something about who we all are, and that here we are, 50 years later, still protesting, still demanding, still deciding that, that our lives matter, and that there are also people who are like storming the Pentagon or whatever, saying, or and saying that and saying, well, our lives matter too, like they like as if they don't get what was really being expressed, and so that continuum of struggle, that continuum of explanation, that continuum of having to say the same thing over and over and over again, that continuum actually of restorative and regenerative architecture that we have to employ in order to survive, for me, finds itself into the poem. And I think it is the only way that John Lewis and C.T. Vivian were able to do what they did, to be the great activists that they were. They experienced the world in a way that I'll never know.
Well, we have an interesting question from one of our viewers. Have the two of you, Meshell, Carl, felt a momentum surge in civil rights awareness in your communities? And also, thank you for your brilliant performance.
Are you feeling a surge?
Do I feel a momentum surge?
Yeah.
In that this particular protest was a global, protest, or that there were other, at the same time, and that there were other countries, all around the world that we could turn on the TV and we could not just see brown and black people crying, but we could also see people, in Asia and wherever, protesting. That was a first for me, but it was also I'd like to think that it somehow has happened before in some other way. That globally, humans have made, that kind of declaration. But I don't know that I think that there was a, what was the word used again?
Surge.
A surge. I don't know if I felt like it was a surge, because I feel like to be black in America, for me, is, we've been protesting every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's not a day that there's not a protest, even if that protest is, whether it's hip hop, or whether it's a conversation, or whether it's a, we're just talking on the street, just shooting, whatever, or just, I don't mean shooting with a gun, but I mean just dealing with each other. The protest that we live, finds itself in so many different ways that I am no stranger to protest. I don't think any of us are, not especially those of us who believe in freedom, who demand our freedoms, who want our freedoms, and who have been marginalized, so that we have had to find a way to articulate how we want our freedoms, which we shouldn't really have to do, because humanity is humanity, So that's no. So I don't know. I think we've been protesting for a long time.
I guess it's a sort of a community thing, because I found last summer, when we were all being told to stay home, that going out and marching through Brooklyn, as it happened, was I felt something new.
Mm-hmm.
Just
I'm not saying
because
that there wasn't.
just because it was we were being told to stay indoors, and people in their thousands were ignoring that and going out in the middle of the pandemic because it was the right thing to do.
Right. And it was a rainbow. It was a rainbow coalition, of people who left their houses and joined that movement. What a great thing.
Yeah.
But also, I think a lot of people, if they were told to stay in their houses, they were probably told to stay in their houses for fear that this uprising, this absurd, this upsurgence would threaten their lives or the lives of their family
Or their property.
or their property. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh God, they're going to break a window. Which we did. And you know what? And I say, so what? It's like not to I have all due respect to all the people whose windows were broken and had to get a new window, but that has nothing to do with all the people who lost people and were unable to get another one of the people that they lost. So it's entirely different, and that's what we were protesting. To break a window is it is the slightest, most minuscule thing that can be done in any kind of a upsurge or upheaval of a moment.
So we've been talking, among other things, about repetition, and there is, Meshell, in Carl's poem, a kind of never the same river twice kind of feeling to it. What about the music? There's literal repetition. Is there as much literal repetition as maybe I thought I was hearing, or is it never quite the same thing twice?
It's never quite the same, and nothing's the same way twice. I'm sure things shift. But I wanted to go back to, do we think the surge, are more people involved? That's how I took the question. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people are more aware of the environment that has been created by the last 4 years of a leader who just created an environment that I think it's hard to be apathetic. It's hard to sit on the sideline. And I am seeing that. And I see a lot more people willing to be involved in situations and involved with people that they probably just would have never crossed their mind. So I am excited about that. The thing I would like to see a surge in personally is sort of, we've had a great distance from pain for a long time. I'll never understand. What John Lewis went through, I can't even fathom. Or what my parents experienced, I can't even fathom. And those before me. But what I'm hoping that we have a surge in our ability to see that some things are in a loop that we should question. Some things are repetitive that should be more talked about, or that we might need to break that cycle in. And that's what I'm really hoping for, that this administration, this moment in time, all this death that people are experiencing. Bill Bryson says eventually your atoms will, die and move on to become other things. Perhaps that's an interesting way to think of this all. They'll cease to form and become different things. And I'm hoping, like I said, this moment will just allow people to really ask themselves what's important, what's important in their community and in the larger picture. That's the surge I'm hoping for. Yeah. More intimate conversations about that. And that pieces like this, I hope people understand, I really am grateful to the Lincoln Center. It pays artists fair wages. This has been a hard year for people who are, live in the clouds and write poetry. And so, I'm just hoping that, just humanity will start to rethink libraries and museums and performance spaces, and we can all interact in different ways and and learn more about one another to sort of bridge that otherness. That loop of otherness is what I'm hoping somebody comes in and plays some free-form jazz on.
Right.
Change it up a little bit.
I like to think of, I just like, what you just said reminded me so much of what I constantly quote, which is Bernice Johnson Reagon, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagon, singer, anthropologist, activist.
And Toshi's mom.
Toshi's mom, founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. What she said to me one time in France, there comes a time in your life when you discover an emptiness and you've had no thought of yourself as being empty and you've been operating as if you were not, but it is there, this emptiness. And the moment that you discover your emptiness, nothing hurts more than your emptiness except your yearning to be full. And that's when, for the first time in your life and the first time with your life, you search for a tongue, a language, a means of articulation. I've always remembered her saying that to me, and I've always remembered those words and how powerful. I will take them with me to my grave. And I think that we must all find a tongue, a language, a means of articulation in order to enact our freedoms, however we do it, whether it's through music, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through dance or whatever. But in order to do that, we also have to acknowledge that darkness, right? We have to acknowledge the very dark place that we've been ignoring has been existent all along, right? Those dark places even throughout our bodies that we've just been sort of skipping down the street thinking, I can get through, I'm all right.
Yeah.
Right. We'll be okay. Everything's gonna be all right.
Yeah, it's all good.
Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's not gonna be fine. And when I say everything's not gonna be fine, doesn't mean I don't have hope for tomorrow. I'm just saying that everything will be fine when you find a way to speak to what is not okay, and which is basically what Dr. Reagan was saying, and to do something about it.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what John Lewis did. That's exactly what C.T. Vivian did. That's exactly what many people whose names we cannot name did. They found an articulation, a tongue, a language.
And they stirred up good trouble.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Good trouble.
Good trouble. So one of the things about this is that, we use these phrases in our language and they're not new, but because of the change in context, they become new, and some of them appear in your poem. I can't breathe. Take a knee. These things have resonance and layers of meaning in 2021 that they didn't have just a couple of years ago. And, that's...
Yeah, and that was on purpose without being obvious about it. I didn't want to be... it's a fine thing that any artist who cares about their work knows what it is to explore the intricacies of this one line, or whether it's the phrase, how you phrase a note, or how you paint that one line on the wall, or where you might put this one word that may or may not be perceived as having something to do with this moment that we are in, but it was absolutely on purpose, to say that where we were is where we are and is where we're going. So we do not die in several ways, right? Our pain does not die. Our struggle does not die. Our yearnings do not die. Our need to understand who we are and understand each other should not die. The space that we must create in order to hear each other cannot die, and oppression itself has not died. So that's absolutely true.
Well, and it's interesting, Meshell, to hear Carl talking about, that line, the shape of the line. I mean, that's your job as a composer, right? That's what every musician worth his or her salt does is, what's the shape of the line? You know, how do I end this phrase? I mean, the similarities between the two art forms is, I mean, they were at one point, thousands of years ago, a single art form, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the human voice and telling stories, and that's the universal.
You're right. I mean, I know
That's the glue.
Yeah, that's the glue. Yeah. I mean, I think you're a great poet. I mean, I really do. I mean, I think you are an amazing poet, and I'm not saying that to, you know, I honestly, I'm not the only one, obviously.
I appreciate it.
But you know, before we put a name, before we decided to call, you know, poets, or singers, you know, we've been exploring language, and we've been exploring music and tonality, and their relationship to communication. Something I learned really in a great way, like being in Africa, living in West Africa for a period that, you know, it made me strip away all of my, you know, sort of college education, Western ideologies of, you know, what this is, what that is, and what I thought I could do and what I thought I could not do, right down to even using my body to dance. You know, that everybody is a dancer, everybody is a singer, everybody is a poet, everybody has a breath, everybody has a sound that they can make, you know, everybody. So that's all we need to do. We become the community that finds, you know, become the person within the community that finds your particular relationship to the sound and the movement that you need to make. And nobody needs to be necessarily anointed as a poet, a recording artist, a singer, because we all are.
Right. Well, of course, the West African tradition of the jolly, or the griot, to use the French word, what are they? They are storytellers, poets, musicians, town criers, court historians.
Right. That's why I don't blow the lines, and I never did. You know, between writing poetry and music, and or singing poetry, or, you know, I mean, this particular poem I speak, but I mean, there, as you know, I mean, there are many poems that I would intone, or I would, you know, and people would be like, oh wow, that's kind of interesting. Why he's sort of singing it, and then, you know, I guess I would find myself actually completely singing some of the poems that I wrote, but it's all the same thing.
Yeah,
it's all the same thing. All the same thing.
Have you heard Meshell's version of the Prince song, Sometimes It Snows in April? I mean,
I sure have.
When you were talking just now about, you know, sort of intoning, and that, I just suddenly flashed back on that magical performance, Meshell, that you recorded shortly after Prince died. Wow, 5 years ago already. Hard to believe.
Yeah.
But, you know, that there is a poetry in performance as well. That wasn't your song, but you made it your song through the way that you felt it and communicated it.
Yeah. How do you do many different shows? Do you find you have to switch selves in your?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I only have the one self. You know, I try not to put on another person. You know, I think curiosity is a wonderful thing, and I'm always curious about people's process, and, you know, which is why I ask you, how did you do this? Why did you do this? And I think that as long as you have that, because curiosity comes with it a certain open-eyed, open-eared sensibility. So, you know, I think curiosity is a wonderful thing, and I think if people storming the Capitol on January 6th had been a little more curious about the people who 6 months earlier had been protesting across the street, you might not have had that situation. You know, curiosity is a very short step to empathy.
Absolutely. but I, you know, I will disagree with you that you only have the one self.
Yeah.
Because who you were yesterday, science proves this.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Who you were yesterday is not who you are today.
Yeah.
You are one day older than you were yesterday. And so you are a different self. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to how you express yourself and what you need to say or what you need to see or who you need to love or who you need not to love anymore and what you need not to love anymore, you know, what you need not to wear anymore and what names, you know, you need, you know, I'm serious, you know, what, you know, the words that were given us, you know, to ascribe to things or ourselves or movements or whatever, you know, sometimes, you know, it's like, I've always said the American polyglot, you know, sort of fails me. It fails me in the way that it does not describe me,
Right.
you know, and that and my search for words, my curiosity, like you, my curiosity is to constantly find words that help me frame me, you know, because I'm always framing in a different way, and that curiosity is always a different kind of curiosity, right?
Yeah, you said that so confident. You only have the one self. That's gonna haunt you tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what happens when you turn the tables on the interviewer, and he is suddenly forced to dance for all he's worth. I was just making that up as I went along.
Right. Well, so then you know that's not true, right? You know that.
I'm thinking
you know
about
that's
his
not
wife.
true. You don't know.
If she heard this, I bet she'd question it. His wife would question.
I'm sure.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I only ask that because there's as a singer or a poet or a performer, you have to engage with all yourselves in order to bring something to the moment that allows the other people to enter your space, I think. So.
The multiplicity of selves really is your consciousness, you know, and without getting too like, because I'm sure people out there like, but you know, but you know this, but we all are many, we all have many selves, and if you don't want to believe it in a spiritual kind of way, you can just again, like I said, look at science, which I do even in the poem, you know, you know, look at science, look at what science tells us. We are never the same. We are the same, but we're not the same. You know, we're the same thing you think you saw yesterday, but we're not the same thing you saw yesterday. We're something else.
Well, that kind of brings us back to where we started, and that seems appropriate somehow for tonight's proceedings here in the Green Space. We've been speaking with Carl Hancock Rux, Meshell Ndegeocello, and listening to The Baptism, the second iteration, subtitled Rhetoric. Both versions have visuals by Carrie Mae Weems. And folks who are watching, if you want to check out both versions, they are online. You can see them and hear them at thebaptismpoem.org. The Baptism was commissioned by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. I'd like to thank the crew here at the Green Space, here in real life, in the room with us.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for today.
And Christopher Bruce, who
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
and of course, Meshell, Carl, great to have the two of you here. Thank you so much.
I look forward to seeing your next self.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Yeah.